Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name's Kaylee and these are my books. Today's video is my March and April wrap-up where I will be talking about all the books I read in March and April and still need to review, meaning I am not going to be talking about any books that were already featured in videos in March and April. So all of the books that were in any reading vlogs, I'm just not talking about in this wrap-up because there's simply too many books to talk about and I don't want my channel to be repetitive. So I'm focusing on books that I haven't had a chance to mention in any of my videos so far. So books that were not mentioned in any video in March and April that I still read in March and April means I have about 14 books to talk about, and these books range from DNFs all the way up to 5 stars. As always, I'm going to start from the bottom and work my way up to those 5-star books. I have 2 DNFs to talk about, the first of which is an incredibly sad DNF. It's A Twist of the Blade by S.M. Gaither. This is a book 2 in a fantasy romance series, the first book being The Song of the Marked, and I gave book 1 5 stars. I loved the first book. And then to DNF book 2, I DNF'd it at about 50%. I was so bored. So the issue that I had with this fantasy romance book is book 1 was so compelling. I loved the characters so much. But then a twist happens that heavily impacts the characters and their personalities. And I felt like book 2, these were brand new people. I felt like all the characters, all the traits in their personalities that made me love them in book 1 were completely erased and we were starting from scratch. And the plot was so slow moving. I just didn't care. I was bored by everyone. I had no connection and therefore I DNF'd at 50% and that means I'm DNFing this series. So while I adored book 1, A Song of the Marked, I can't recommend this series because in my opinion, book 2 is not enjoyable. Now the next DNF is slightly different because the next DNF, I do think the book is good. It's just not a book for me. And that is Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky. I DNF'd this book at about 60%. It was, I have it in my notes here, it was 54%. So actually closer to 50%. But I read 54% of this book, which is, around 300-ish pages. Gave it a good go. I just don't think this story is for me. I'm very new to middle grade fantasy. This is one of the first middle grade fantasies I've tried, so I'm not even sure if this is a genre for me. I think if I was younger, I would have adored this book, but I just think I enjoy a book with a little bit more mature themes than this book had. I think this book is a strong book though. I think it has so much cool mythology in it. It feels very unique. The characters are really well done and the plot was really interesting. Like everything about this book was good. This is an objectively great book. It just subjectively did not work for me, unfortunately. While I couldn't really give you a synopsis of A Twist of the Blade because it was a sequel, I can give you a synopsis of Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky. This is about a 7th grader, Tristan Strong, who is trying to be a boxer, but he doesn't do too well in his fights. He has a lot of pressure on him from his family, and he just doesn't think he is strong enough for them. And also, he has some recent tragedy in his life as he's lost his best friend, and he has his best friend's journal, and he's just reading through it and journaling himself, when suddenly all of these seemingly magical creatures get very interested in him and his journal and his ability to tell stories. I would recommend this book to people that like middle grade fantasy. Again, I think it's a great book. It just wasn't a book for me. I didn't have any 1 stars in March and April because I ended up DNFing quite a lot of books. I mean, I have the 2 DNFs to talk about here, but there were quite a few DNFs in my vlogs as well. I was just in a mood to DNF a book if I was disliking it, and therefore I didn't end up with any 1 stars, which works out great for me. But I did have a couple 2 stars. So moving into my 2 stars, the first of which is One for My Enemy by Olivia Blake, which, side note, I just found out that this author's name is Olivia Blake, not Olivia Blake, and I've been saying Olivia Blake for forever, so I would like to apologize to anyone that I have misled because that is not the author's name, but this is the same author as Atlas 6, and I loved Atlas 6. I really loved the sequel to Atlas Paradox, so I'm a fan of this author, although I haven't read anything except for One for My Enemy outside of that one series that I really liked, and unfortunately One for My Enemy only got 2 stars for me, and this was, again, really disappointing because I loved the beginning so much. The first like 20%, I was like, oh my god, could this be a new favorite book? Is this a 5-star? It started out so strong. So this is a book about, it kind of like crosses witchy magical stuff with a mafia romance with like very heavy Romeo and Juliet vibes. So it's very much like a dark magical, whimsical, romantic story. And the prose is beautiful. Olivia Blake's writing is fantastic. I will stand by that. The prose in One for My Enemy is awesome. And the plot and the characters in the first 20% were great. The opening scene had my jaw on the floor. I was obsessed with the opening scene. I literally thought this was going to be a new favorite. And then once we were getting past about the 20% mark, things just started going more and more downhill. And then by the end of the book, I was unfortunately quite bored. I did finish it, but it was a chore to finish by the end. I just think for me, this book was too long and we focused on too many sets of characters, too many generations. I think I would have liked this story if it was a bit more focused and a bit more zoomed in on one set of characters, which ultimately would make this book quite a bit shorter as well. And I think I would have cared more, because the more and more the book was zooming further and further out and showing us more and more generations, more and more effects of these families fighting with each other, along with the magical effects on the greater community that they inhabit, I was losing interest more and more. So I was obsessed with the book when we were very much zoomed in on one set of characters, and then the more and more that got introduced, the more and more I got disconnected from the story, unfortunately. So I ended up giving this book 2 stars. I still am a fan of this author and I still want to try more of this author's books, but unfortunately One for My Enemy was not my new favorite book from this author, and it was very sad. Next up is another 2-star book. It was Corrupt by Penelope Douglas. This book how do I even talk about this book? So this is a smut, dark romance, bully romance about this girl who is trying to make her own way in the world. She comes from a very privileged background and she wants to prove to the world that she is able to exist on her own. Meanwhile, this boy that was her boyfriend's older brother is kind of reconnecting with her, and she kind of has a thing for him, kind of doesn't, and his friend recently got out of jail, and she thinks that maybe there could be a romance there, but flash to his point of view, and he has this whole plan that he wants to break her because he blames her for his friends going to jail back when they were in high school. But the issue I have with this book is parts of it just felt icky to me, and I don't mean that in any sort of judgmental way. If you liked this book, I am so happy for you that you liked it, but parts of this book were just a little bit icky for me, and I think that just is the fact that part of this book in the flashback scenes is set in high school when she is still a high schooler, and he is not in high school. He is older than her, and I hate that. I don't like any of my dark romances to involve teenagers at all. I want them all to be full adults. And so I hated the parts where she was a teenager. And then also a lot of the parts where the guy was supposed to be like badass and like, whoa, he's like really morally gray, really kind of cool, and the way that he's able to do all this like kind of terrible things, I was just finding a bit cringy. Like, I don't know, I did not think it was cool that these group of guys were just going and pulling pranks on people. Like, I was like, oh, I was very much cringing the whole time. I didn't like it at all. It felt like a middle schooler's idea of what makes a cool, badass group of guys. Like, if I was reading this in middle school, which thank God I was not reading this in middle school, but if I was reading this in middle school, I would have been like, whoa, this book is crazy, I love it. But reading it now, I'm just like, don't like that, don't like that. However, sounds like I'm talking about this book like it's a 1-star, right? However, there's a smut scene in this book, a sauna scene. So good. So good. I loved it. I loved the sauna scene. And the sauna scene gave this book 2 stars. And the sauna scene makes me be like, do I continue on in this series? Even with all my issues, do I continue on? It is a series. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. If you've read these books, like, should I continue on? Do my issues in this first book continue on? Because I feel like we're kind of past the weird high school stuff and the weird cringy stuff. Because, like, the flashbacks are over now. Like, we should be moving on in future books. I don't know. Let me know down in the comments. If I didn't like this first book, but also there were parts that I really liked about the first book, like that sauna scene, should I give the other ones a try or not? Moving on to 3 stars and keeping in the smutty theme, I read Morning Glory Milking Farm. Listen, I'm giving it 3 stars. The romance is actually cute in this. The romance was cute. I was rooting for them. I really liked their connection. I will say though, 24 ounces? No. No. That made me want to throw up. No, thank you. Not okay with that. So messy. So messy. What the heck? No, thank you. No, thank you to the 24 ounces. That part of the book, really, I hated that part of the book. And it made me read those parts of the books like I couldn't look away from this train wreck type of feeling, where I was feeling nauseated. I could not eat during this book. I couldn't eat at all. It was gross. I hated the 24 ounces part. But then I liked some other parts. And I'm not saying every smutty scene was bad, just the 24 ounces parts of the scenes were bad to me. I don't think I'll continue on in this series though, which is kind of odd that I'm considering continuing on in a 2-star book and not a 3-star book. But I think I got the experience I wanted from Morning Glory Milking Farm, and I'm okay not continuing on in this type of monster romance series. I've grown as a person now that I have experienced this cow situation, and I'm good. I'm good. We can move on in life now. Some more smutty books to talk about. I feel like I'm talking about so many smutty books. I haven't read that many in the past 2 months, but it's just that the smutty books didn't make it into my main videos. But I did read Desperate Measures by Katie Robert, and this is one of those villain retellings, Disney villain retellings. So this is like What If Jafar Got the Girl? And it's really short. It's like just over 200 pages. And I'm giving it 3 stars. I think that the scenario in which I read this book is what made me enjoy the book enough to give it 3 stars. So let me set the scene for you, because the scene is important in understanding why I gave this 3 stars, because I think typically I would have given it lower. I was driving home from an airport in a part of Texas I had never been in, so it was a brand new drive home for me. It was a 2-hour drive, and I get a little bit stressed out when I'm driving. I don't like to drive. I don't like it. It makes me nervous. And this was a drive where I was driving through a big city, and in the span of probably 25 minutes, I had to get on and off like 10 different freeways. The direction to get home was I was constantly merging onto a freeway and then merging onto a different one, merging onto a different one. So it was kind of a hard drive, a complicated drive, and I was stressed out, okay? And I was listening to this audiobook when I was driving. And this was the perfect audiobook to listen to when I was driving, because I didn't have to pay that much attention to it, because most of it is just smut. And yet, when I was tuning in, it was like such a nice reprieve from the stress of driving to hear this smutty book. So 3 stars. It helped me through that drive. I got home safely. I made it back. I didn't mess up any of the mergings. And I think if you like super smutty books, you will like this book. I think for me, typically, I would like a little bit more plot to go with the smut. 'Cause for me, what makes the smuttiest for me is when I care a ton about the characters, and I can only care a ton about the characters through like a more well-developed plot. So that's why this book typically I think wouldn't have gotten as many stars. I think typically it would have been actually a DNF. But in the situation of me driving home, this was a perfect audiobook for that scenario, and therefore I'm giving it 3 stars because I did have a 3-star enjoyment with the book. Next up, I'm giving A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher 3 stars. This was actually Sav from Riveting Reads book club pick for the month of April, and I was the co-host for that, so I'm not going to talk a ton about this because we have a whole live show where we talk about this, and we do start with a spoiler-free section, so I'll link Sav's live show down below. I'm just mentioning it here because it's not technically mentioned in any of my videos, but I do talk about it quite a bit with Sav, so if you're interested on my thoughts, you should go check out Sav's live show. Now moving into 4-star books, the first of which I have is The Name of All Things. This is the sequel to The Ruin of Kings, so I can't really give you a synopsis for it because it is a sequel. But The Ruin of Kings I gave 5 stars to, and it's going to be one of my favorite books of the year. I loved it, and so giving 4 stars to this one is a little bit sad because I was hoping the whole series would be 5 stars, but this is a series where we kind of jump around with different characters in each of the different books. So I'm also not super surprised that the books aren't consistent in their star ratings. There's going to be certain characters you like more than others, and therefore there's going to be certain books in the series you like more than others. This is a book that took me a little bit to get into. I just wasn't as connected right away as I was in The Ruin of Kings. But once I was connected to the characters, I did enjoy my time with it. So the 4-star rating is based off of the fact that it took me a little bit to care about the characters. And I think the footnotes in this book, because this is a series with footnotes and kind of like quirky writing, like it's not necessarily quirky. It's just writing with some gimmicks, I guess, and one of those gimmicks is footnotes. In the first book, I felt like the footnotes were substantial and important to the plot, where in this one, they felt a little bit more gimmicky, where they didn't feel like as substantial, they didn't feel like they had as much of a purpose. It almost felt like the author just kind of like had to use footnotes because they used footnotes in the first book, but they weren't so sure what purpose the footnotes would have in this book, so they're just some like comedic relief. I don't know. I just didn't like the footnotes as much in this book, basically. So the slow start and the footnotes made it be a 4-star and not a 5-star. However, I do still want to continue on in the series. Obviously, a 4-star is great, right? I just feel like I need to talk about the reasons why it's not a 5-star because I've sung so many praises to the first book in the series. My next 4-star is 6 Scorched Roses. This is a novella by Carissa Broadbent that is after Serpent in the Wings of Night. And if you watch my fantasy romance vlog, and then you know Serpent in the Wings of Night is one of my favorite books ever now. And so 6 Scorched Roses is a novella that's kind of set in between book 1 and book 2 in that duology. And 6 Scorched Roses follows different characters than the main characters in Serpent in the Wings of Night. And I really like 6 Scorched Roses. I'm giving it 4 stars because ultimately it is a novella, so there wasn't as much development of the characters, as much development of the romance between these characters, but it was still compelling and I did enjoy my time with it. 6 Scorched Roses is about a woman that is trying to cure a plague in her city, and in order to cure this plague, she thinks she needs to go to this really scary vampire that lives in their city but keeps to himself, and she is a human and this is a human village, so this vampire looming over them, living off in the city, is like terrifying for everyone. So she is super brave and knocks on his door and asks him to donate his blood for her to try to make a cure to help out with the plague. And the romance is, of course, between them two. And I thought it was sweet. I really loved the mixture of science and magic in here with her trying to make this cure. But then, of course, he's a vampire, so there's magic associated with his blood. I really like the glimpse into gods that we got and the mythology that we got in this book. I think it did a good job at setting up a little bit more of the political situation that was going on with some of the houses introduced in book 1, and setting up a little bit of the theological situation that's going on with these godly introductions. So I do recommend this novella if you like Serpent in the Wings of Night, especially if you haven't read Ashes in the Star-Cursed King. Is that the title? I don't know. These titles are so long and complicated, but basically 6 Scorched Roses I had a great time with, but you know, it's just not anywhere near to the level of Serpent because it's shorter and there just wasn't enough time to get it to the level of Serpent. Now moving into my 5 stars, and I have 5 5-star reads to talk about, which is really exciting. The first of which is Spitehouse. This is a horror book and it is actually a debut book, which is crazy because I thought the writing was so fantastic. And this is a horror book that is about a man who is on the run with his 2 daughters. We don't know why he's on the run, but he's in a situation where he is really limited in what jobs he seeks, and he sees a job listing for someone to stay in this supposedly haunted house and collect evidence for the owner. And so he takes the job because he's desperate for money and this job has a big payout, but he might get a lot more than he bargained with the job. And I loved everything about this book. I think this book is going to be one of my favorite horror books of the year. I thought the writing was excellent. The way that this author was able to communicate certain feelings that the characters had, I felt it. For example, when a character felt cold, I felt cold. When a character was scared, I felt scared. Like, the author just did such a great job at describing what was going on. And then also the characters themselves. I loved the integration that these characters had between feeling like real people and having normal things in their lives, but also having these extraordinary events going on and their normal reactions to these extraordinary events, and yet still making them extraordinary people and therefore interesting and compelling and unique for us to want to read about them. I really loved how the author made this family dynamic because I cared so much about this core family, the father and his 2 daughters. I just was obsessed with all of these characters. They all felt real. I think it was just a brilliantly done book, and the scares were scary to me. I will say though, this is very much an atmospheric, slower paced book. So if you're looking for a book that has like horror jump scare moments like every 2 seconds, this is not the book for you. This is the book for you if you want a book that's going to make you wait a little bit. It's going to make you set the scene a little bit with the book, set up the characters a little bit. That way when it gets to its climax, it has a bigger impact, in my opinion. And I really appreciated how the author was able to weave in a lot of social issues into this plot as well. And I thought the author was able to tackle so many issues without it feeling overwhelming and without it dragging down the plot at all. The author was able to talk about racism in America. The author was able to talk about being a parent. The author was able to talk about poverty. The author was able to talk about police brutality. The author was able to talk about so many things, and like generational trauma was tackled in this book. Like, this author just, it is a book where you read it and it's so entertaining of a book. So please, like, don't think it's not entertaining. It's very, very entertaining, but it's entertaining in a way that just makes you be like, man, this author is a genius, and I cannot wait to see what else this author writes because I will be pre-ordering everything. Another 5-star I had was episode 13, and episode 13 is a lost episode from a paranormal investigator show where basically this episode they get real evidence and bad things happen very quickly. The book is told in a mixed media style, so I'll flip through some pages so you can hopefully see that it is mixed media all throughout, because it's supposed to be reminiscent of a found footage style of movie. However, even with the book being this cool inside, I highly, highly, highly recommend the audiobook over the physical book, or at least a full immersion read where you're listening to the audiobook and following along in the physical book, because I gave this book 5 stars purely because of the audio's production. If I was rating this book just for the book itself and nothing to do with the audio, it would have gotten 4 stars. But the audiobook production is one of the best produced audiobooks I've ever heard. The audiobook added so much to the story with the sound effects, with the full cast. It just felt like an experience. When I finished that audiobook, I felt like I had been through something. It felt like an extended movie or something. I don't know. I can't even explain it well. Like, I just think the audiobook was such a cool experience. Only comparable, in my opinion, to the Weight of Blood audiobook by Tiffany D. Jackson. That audiobook is also so good, and this audiobook is just as good, if not even better, honestly. So this book got 5 stars only due to the audiobook. If you can get your hands on the audiobook, please give it a go because it is such a fun time. Another 5-star I have is The Writing Retreat. This is a thriller about a retreat where a bunch of writers can go and just work on their writing. That was a dumb sentence, but you know what I mean. And this is a very exclusive writing retreat with a very famous author that everyone is dying to get into. But when they get there, there's some weird vibes. There's some weird vibes at this writing retreat. They're not allowed technology. They're not allowed communication with the outside world. And it seems a little cultish, a little bit. And things just get progressively more and more crazy in this book. And this climax in this book is insane, and I love it. I just am such a fan of thrillers that are unhinged. The more unhinged the thriller, the better. And I know people are going to have complaints about this book, and I know people already have complaints about this book because it gets ridiculous at the end, but the ridiculousness is what made me give this book 5 stars. I loved it. If you love an over-the-top thriller, if you love an unhinged thriller, you really should try The Writing Retreat. It has a slower start. It's not unhinged the whole way through, but give it some time. Give it some time to get there, and when it gets there, it really gets there. I promise you. To be clear, though, this is a thriller. It's not a horror, okay? So this is all in the scope of the thriller genre, but for the thriller genre, this is unhinged, and it's wonderful. Another 5-star book I have is The Honeymooners by Christina Lauren. This is a rom-com romance, and it is about 2 people. It's the best woman, maid of honor, that's the name, not best woman. It's about the maid of honor and the best man. And basically the whole wedding gets super, super sick at the wedding except for them. And the bride and groom are unable to go on their honeymoon, but they already paid for it. They can't get their deposits back. So they decide to send the maid of honor and the best man on the honeymoon instead. But the catch is they have to pretend like they're married, but they also hate each other. So it's a hate to love, enemies to lovers romance. And I will say, like, not all of it takes place in the honeymoon location, but a majority of it does. It's around like 70% takes place on the honeymoon, and I love the vacation vibes. I am finding that I love books that have a vacation setting, and the fact that most of this book does have a vacation setting was wonderful. And this book does get a little bit heavy towards the end, just FYI. It's not just light and funny the whole way through. It does tackle some deeper issues, but I actually loved that it tackled the deeper issues because those deeper issues gave a real reason for the third act breakup, and I'm finding myself being so picky with third act breakups in like light rom-coms because more often than not, in my opinion, they're just dumb. I feel like the reason is made up because of a genre constraint, and there's not any real reason. It's just miscommunication or something dumb like that. Where in this book, there was a real reason, and they really did need to have a third act breakup because it was true to these characters and it was true to their growth. So I loved this book. If you like romances, give this book a go. I know almost everyone's already read it, but if you somehow haven't, try it out. And last but not least is Hellbent. I gave this book 5 stars, which I'm so happy about because I loved Ninth House so much. So I'm so happy that the sequel lived up to the hype for me because these last 2 months I feel like were the months of sequels not living up to the hype. But Hellbent got my back because Hellbent was awesome. Again, I can't tell you much about this book because it is a sequel, but in my opinion, it's just as good as Ninth House. I loved it just as much. Like, I can't even pick which one's my favorite because they were both amazing. I loved how one of the characters were in this book. I know that's so vague and probably tells you nothing, but the appearance of one of them, my jaw was on the floor. What the heck? Nothing could have prepared me for how one character appeared in this book, how one character showed up to everyone. What? And then some of the like bad guys in this book, some of the monsters in this book, I was so hyped to see in Hellbent because I didn't even know they existed in this world. So the fact that those things do exist in this world makes me so happy. And then the depiction of hell was really interesting also. I loved everything about this book. And Alex, our main character, is so cool and so badass and so sassy, and she's just one of my favorite characters ever. So getting to hang out with her a little bit more in Hellbent was awesome because I love to root for Alex. So here's all of the books that I own that I just talked about, but I did just finish up talking about the 14 books I had to talk about, so thanks for sticking around. Let me know down in the comments what your favorite books from March and April were, and if you liked this video, please like the video and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you next time. Bye!